Hello. Hi. Some of you are probably expecting to see Fabio Rubio from PMI coming to talk today, but unfortunately Fabio was unable to attend, so I've been asked to stand in and make a presentation in his place and try and keep it as close to the type of content that he would be talking about. So I think he was going to be talking about the digital supply chain, or what does digital supply chain mean in Philip Morris. And what I'm going to talk about is certainly an element of that. But this is from a keynote speech that I made at the Gartner conference last year about leading and creating sustained excellence in the supply chain. Now, if we look at where the supply chain is today and some of the great changes that have happened in the supply chain over the last 10 years, we now have supply chains where the CEO has we have a role called Chief Supply Chain Officer, which didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, where we have now a function that has end-to-end control of the supply chain. Supply chains are now regarded by are seen as being really important by the markets and by the stock markets and understanding the performance of the supply chain. And that's a really important capability and one of the things that's really changed. In terms of the tools that we use within the supply chain, they've changed dramatically over the last few years. We now have the ability to do supply network modeling and those type of capabilities using our own people as opposed to having to use external consultants to come in to be able to do those supply chain modeling type of activities. If I look at the type of infrastructure that we use in the supply chain, 10 years ago it was all about having systems like Oracle and SAP, which were hardwired. We now have cloud-based tools that allow the supply chains to run which are very rapid to implement and much lower cost to implement. We have greatly different type of capability within the supply chain. If I use the example of Amazon. So a couple of years ago, Amazon bought a company called Kiva Systems who run who make these little orange robots. And within some of their warehouses, they have these robots that, well, as soon as you place an order on the Amazon website, it sends an instruction. There's no human intervention at all to the robot to go and take the item out of the warehouse. And the first time there's any human interaction on those orders is when that item gets delivered to a packing station. And now they're looking at even automating that further, and obviously people have seen the drones from that Amazon were talking about. But actually going to the sort of 1 hour delivery is now becoming the norm, or the capability that companies like Amazon have been developing. But is that the state that most organizations were in? Well, in Gartner we have what we call a 5-stage maturity model. But 65% of companies are still at stage 1, at stage 2. The supply chain, as it's always been, is at a very low stage of maturity. Companies still operate in functional silos. So, what's best for procurement? Probably to buy really sort of large lot sizes. Is that the right thing to do for the supply chain? Well, it may be, or it may not be. What's the best thing to do for manufacturing? Manufacturing to do minimum setups, like make nice large runs. Is that the right thing to do for the supply chain? Well, it may be, it's probably not, and so on. So everyone is still operating in these functional silos. Or not everyone, but 65% of companies are still operating in those type of functional silos. So what do we see happening between the type of capabilities we see being developed in the supply chain between now and looking forward at 2026? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is, supply chain will lead the decade. The importance of supply chain has only just started. And as we see over the next 10 years, as I'm going to demonstrate when we talk a little bit about sort of more digitization of the supply chain and the types of things that people are doing in the supply chain, it's going to have an increasingly important role. And there's 3 areas that I'm going to talk about. One is about business process, the other is business model, and finally, the business moment. So if I start talking about business process, well, bimodal challenges are the top of mind for CEOs. So what do I mean about bimodal? Now, this is I suppose, the very trendy thing that people are talking about in supply chain is about being bimodal. It's about thinking on one side, and mode 1 is like continuing this continuous improvement and becoming better at what we've always done. But the mode 2 is actually thinking really innovatively and thinking completely outside the box and actually thinking, what can I do completely differently is going to create value for my organizations. And if we look at what was important for CEOs, and this is a study that Gartner does every year, last year in 2014, CEOs were focused on cost management and growth. But now CEOs are really focused. The things that they're talking about that are really changing are things like, operations improvement is the one area where they want that there's more and more focus on. Cost management is less important. Profit improvement is less important. Growth is less important. So now people are thinking about, well, what supply chain? What can you do differently that's going to contribute to my business? And part of this is due to the fact that more things are being connected every day. So, we have, and I'm going to use some of these as little sort of case studies or little examples about what we mean. We have things like, jet engines with being more and more connected to the Internet of Things, and that's an example. We've got an example from a drinks company about having, sensors actually attached to bottles, so actually you can start using that information to provide an additional service to the customer, but also an additional set of visibility to the manufacturers. We have things like the connected fridge, which are designed to make life easier in the home. And these are really things that are happening. And so by 2025, we see that there will be 50 billion connected things. And that's from companies like Cisco and companies like Ericsson, who are really pioneering the Internet of Things in terms of the cases. This is what they're telling us, is that about this 50 billion connected devices. But also, it's not just about having connected devices. It's about the way that the technology is developing as well, that we're moving from processes running in a linear fashion to more cognitive machines. And if you start using the example of what's happening in the automotive industry, where you have cars which are more and more automated, but then you've got things like the Google vehicles, where you've got autonomous vehicles, autonomous cars, and then ultimately moving towards driverless cars. Now, this is technology and capability which is existing today, and this is the type of thing that we see happening. More and more automation, more and more items becoming autonomous with less requirement for human intervention. And we also have the idea of algorithmic business. So where you've got the Internet of Things, where you've got all of these connected devices all communicating with each other. But actually, well, what can you do with all of these devices connected to each other and talking to each other? Unless we create digital business or new business models, we're actually not going to be able to leverage all of that information. But the volume of information, with these 50 billion devices that are all talking to each other, all this huge mountain of information, we can't process this in Excel, or we can't process this with normal people. We have to develop algorithms and what we call algorithmic business in order to actually turn all of that information, turn all of that data into information and into insights that we can actually create better decisions in the supply chains. So what you can see here on this picture is at the end of last year, Mercedes published a white paper called Future Truck 2025, where they predicted that by 2025 on the roads of Europe, we will have autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks that will be, you'll be able to talk to them, reroute in real time, be extremely connected all the time, and reprioritizing themselves all the time. This is just an example of the type of capability that's going to be developed. But what's the result of that? Well, in our traditional models, the amount of data that we're going to have is going to be too much data to handle with traditional planning capabilities. It's just, our people will just be overwhelmed. Our people who are used to using Excel predominantly will develop more and more what we call no-touch supply chains. So, using the Amazon-type model where the information comes in, there is no touch on the supply chain, even potentially using this Future Truck 2025, even to the point where it gets delivered to your door. Might be the first time there's any touch in terms of the system or any touch in terms of the actual material. Well, collaboration. We're going to have to collaborate with more and more with suppliers and competitors. And actually what we'll find is our customers are also our competitors, and our customers are all potentially all of our suppliers. So the traditional, I think somebody mentioned in the round table this morning, like the layers of cheese all melting together. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that's the way that the business is going, that actually we can't sort of say, oh, you're in this box, you're a customer, or you're a competitor. But we need to be able to do that profitably. It's all very well saying we're going to create all these customer options and this is going to be this wonderful world, but actually we need to be able to do it profitably. So let me take you through just some of the examples of use cases that we have for the digital supply chain. And what you can see here is a picture of the Trent XWB. Now, at the end of 2013, Rolls-Royce announced that they were showing the world's largest ever 3D printed object when it test flights a Trent XWB 97 engine. So the front bearing housing of this engine, which is actually one of the longest lead times in any jet engine, they're now piloting or prototyping, actually doing this using additive layer manufacturing, so 3D printing of this engine, which is going to be transformational for Rolls-Royce in terms of the way that they manufacture and the way that jet engines are going to be manufactured in the future. But what does this mean for the business model? Well, and what's it mean for a digital supply chain? So this is a hypothetical example, but imagine this flight from London to New York. And there's a sensor on the engine, and they're fitting sensors to engines today, and it's connected to the Internet of Things. And it identifies that this component on the engine is beginning to trend out of tolerance. It's not going to fail immediately. It's still perfectly serviceable, but you can see that there is potentially a future issue on that. And so you're using the big data and analytics within a central repair facility to be able to pick up that and identify that actually we need to start thinking about that and doing some action on it. You can also, simultaneously, you can identify, well, where is that aircraft due to land in the next 2 weeks or so? Is it going to land at an airport that actually has that facilities to be able to perform that level of repair? So you don't have to reroute it to some special, reroute it specially to go and get that aircraft repaired. It can actually be integrated as part of its normal schedule. You can then send an instruction to that repair center or that airport to go and print off the component that actually needs to be swapped out, so you don't need to hold a huge amount of stock for every single jet engine that flies within that repair or within that maintenance center. You can actually go and get it printed. So they print off the part, the aircraft lands, the passengers disembark, and it gets moved into the repair center at that airport, and then it gets returned to the airport as soon as possible. This is another example. This is probably the most direct example of demand sensing. This is Huggies have created this idea of a tweet P. So this is the name is fairly self-explanatory actually, but this is a device which goes into a baby's nappy, and it can sense when the nappy needs to be changed. So this is sends a tweet to the parent, but also this is an example of real-time demand sensing. This information can be sent back to Huggies. They can know exactly, when these nappies are going to, when the parents might be going in to go and replenish their store of nappies. So I'll take you through another example that has been shared with us from a large FMCG organization. They've created this new brand of ice cream called Choco Extreme. And they've market tested it, and they think that it's going to do pretty well. They've got a good S&OP process. They've got a good launch plan. They've primed their supply chain. Things are looking good. First day it launches, Taylor Swift, who apparently my daughter tells me is some famous pop singer, tweets, "OMG, Choco Extreme, the best ice cream ever." Now, what happens is that suddenly you're getting all of these children around the world who are following Taylor Swift, suddenly receiving this tweet on their mobile devices, and you're picking up this information. There's potentially going to be a surge in demand for this ice cream because of this tweet that Taylor Swift has made. But also, in my factories, I've got sensors on all of the bits of equipment that make the Choco Extreme. And they measure the quality, they measure the salinity, they measure the flavor and how the texture of it. And in one of my factories, it actually detects that one of the batches of ice cream, of this new batch of Choco Extreme, is too sweet. And so the system automatically shuts down the factory and says, right, we need to go and resolve that problem. We can't go and ship that product. So now what have I got? I've got a nightmare situation where I've got a great big surge in demand, and I've also got a factory which is going to have has got a quality problem, has therefore been shut down. So how do I go and respond to that? Well, I've got tons and tons of data. What do I do with it? Well, the first thing is I need to mine and analyze the data. I need to go and recognize those different patterns. So I need to understand, well, what happens when Taylor Swift does a tweet? What's the impact of that going to be? But also I need to determine what's the best course of action based on the fact that one of my factories is shut down, and I need to execute that action. So the first thing I'm going to do is to increase my production in my other factories. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, I need to automatically send a signal to all of the inbound material that's coming into my factory, which has been shut down. I need to go and reroute all of that material, divert those trucks, and make sure that they're going to the factories which actually have the capability for manufacturing this Choco Extreme ice cream. I need to shape demand. So how am I going to shape demand? Well, I'm going to go and send out another tweet or a bit of information to all of these children who've actually received this tweet to Taylor Swift, and I'm going to offer them a coupon to go and buy a different flavor of ice cream that I know that we have plenty of material in the supply chain. We've got lots of capacity to go and supply that. So I'm actually going to try and influence that behavior, and I'm going to try and persuade some of them not to go and buy the Choco Extreme. And so all of this is done effectively in real time by, probably by the analytical engines. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but that's all a bit far-fetched, But this is the type of thing that people leading organizations, and it's a real use case that a leading FMCG organization is looking at the moment. And this is about putting these sensors in and actually being able to create this type of analytical capability. But now let's think about the business moment and actually remember that that supply chain is actually going to impact the supply chain in ways that and will make competitors out of people we haven't competed with before. So for example, in 2012, Forbes reported that Amazon are going to become a very disruptive force in the parts supply chain. So traditionally, the aftermarket and parts supply chains have been some of the most profitable areas of business for many organizations. Well, what's the impact on those businesses if Amazon starts getting into that? That could be an extremely disruptive type of capability. Again, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, BMW saw Apple as being a supplier, just another supplier to BMW. Actually, because of now the way that the interface and the dash of the car is actually seen as being now one of the really big differentiators in the automotive market, BMW see Apple as being a significant threat to their business. But, we will lead the next decade. Things, all of this type of capability, gives a whole load of possibility for us. And why is that going to be the case? Well, firstly, it's going to be out of necessity. If organizations don't change, if organizations don't adapt, don't adopt this type of capability, then it's possible they're going to go out of business. We have the Internet of Things. We have these new sort of tools that will allow us, that will become the enablers to allow these type of capabilities to develop. But also, what a lot of organizations have done today is to build out these really good foundations and actually build out foundational processes. And we can leverage and build on those foundations in order to embrace the future that might happen. And so what the recommendations would be, think about digital leadership. Think about how could digital supply chains, or how can digital affect your supply chains? Many people have talked today about the importance of removing organizational barriers. As we move away from linear type supply chains, where all processes get followed in a linear fashion, and things become sequential, the removal of these organizational barriers becomes increasingly important. And actually, companies may well fail because they are unable to remove these organizational boundaries. to climb what we call the demand-driven value network maturity path. This is about your supply chain maturity, and actually start really focus on your supply chain maturity. And finally, you have to be really bold as well. You're going to have to challenge the way that you've done business. You have to be prepared to be seen as a leader within the business, because actually these type of supply chain capabilities could well mean that supply chain goes from being a back office function to actually possibly the most important function within any organization. So finally, I would just want to leave you with saying, I think it's a really great place to work in the supply chain at the moment. I think the supply chain over the next 10 years or so is going to be really exciting. So thank you very much. 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 Thank you very much.